1985, one of the darkest times in the history of Doctor Who, arguably worse than the 90s. Welcome back to the best episode you'll never see, and today we're doing something a little different. Focusing on the 6th Doctor, not only are we going to look at 3 stories from an era, we're going to look at an entire season. So to give some context, in 1985, the first season of Colin Baker's era, season 22, had been received relatively well, with episodes like Attack of the Cybermen, The Two Doctors, and Vengeance on Varos all doing reasonably well in the memory of fans. At the end of this season, though, it was announced that Doctor Who would be going on hiatus indefinitely. This decision was made by someone very well known to Doctor Who fans, Michael Grade, who cut the show as a cost-cutting measure, supposedly. Now, after many months of fighting from John Nathan Turner and other production members of Doctor Who, the show was agreed to be brought back, but with a very different time slot and a very different narrative to what it originally was going to be. Once it came back, we got the wonderful series-long story of Trial of a Time Lord, introducing such concepts as Valiard and Mel, with varying degrees of success. This story was the last triumph for the great writer Robert Holmes as well, and is considered to be Colin Baker's best work. Now, this of course was not the original idea for season 23, though over the years it has become clear what that would have looked like. And I have to say, it's incredibly interesting. Today I'm going to go over the 5 stories that we know would have happened in season 23 had the cancellation not taken place. It is key to note that most of these stories have become reimaginings either as novels or as audio adventures, and in some cases both. There is a lot to cover in this video, so I suggest you sit back, relax, and enjoy this slice of Doctor Who's most interesting history. The first adventure I'm here to talk about would have seen the return of one of the Doctor's oldest enemies, as well as a very interesting location. Being submitted in 1985, The Nightmare Fair. This episode would have been written by Graham Williams and would have featured the Celestial Toymaker at Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Now, let's unpack this idea for a moment, because that's a lot to take in one sentence. Following on from the end of Revelation of the Daleks, or its intentional ending, the Doctor was set to take Perry to Blackpool for a fun day out. This would have seen Perry and the Doctor having a good time initially, but eventually they are captured by the Celestial Toymaker, whose grand scheme is to make an evil arcade game where the player could eventually die. Other elements would have included a teenager who has lost their family, and the revelation that the Celestial Toymaker was in fact a psychic being of tremendous power. The stakes in this story are quite high because he threatens to capture everyone who ever enters Blackpool Pleasure Beach. Assumedly this would have expanded to the world, and the story ended with the Celestial Toymaker losing the game and getting trapped inside. Now, this story is widely available. They released a novelisation in 1989, which has been republished since, I believe, and there is not one, but 2 audio versions of this story. One with the original cast and a charity play that was done in 2002. From the concept alone, I feel like this would have been a very fun episode, especially considering the location was pretty much locked in, due to Doctor Who having links with Blackpool and Longleat for quite a long time. This probably would have been one of Colin Baker's more memorable episodes. The second story here sounds the least expensive to produce, but probably still would have been quite a fun little story. Being penned by Wally K. Daly in 1985, this story would have been entitled The Ultimate Evil and would have continued the idea of the Doctor and Perry needing a holiday. So they take a holiday on the planet of Tranquilla. Known for being one of the most peaceful planets in the universe, probably next to Barcelona. This of course goes awry when a war dealer is on the planet trying to cause hatred between different parts of the planet. This evil criminal called Mordant is somehow able to make anybody hate each other on the planet. Now, this is apparently very interesting when the Doctor starts believing some of this hatred. Don't own it personally, but if you wish to know a bit more about this story, it is available in book form. I believe you can still buy the Target novel of it. If that is the case, I will find an eBay link for you. In fact, I will find a link for all these stories. As much as I say this story is uninteresting, the idea of the Doctor believing propaganda and maybe making the wrong choice is quite interesting to me. I don't know if that's exactly what happened because unfortunately I've never read the book, but that would be incredibly interesting and it would work very well with the Sixth Doctor's erratic behaviour. Fortunately, due to pre-production, we even know that this story would have aired around October 1985 if it had gone through. The next story we're going to talk about is Mission to Magnus. This story would have seen the return of not only Syl from the previous season, but the Ice Warriors' first use since the Third Doctor's era. So this story is quite a lot to unpack, so I may need a minute to explain this. The Doctor's tricked to go to the planet Magnus by one of his old bullies from the Gallifreyan Academy. Once there, he discovers that the planet is afflicted with a disease that affects predominantly males, which is a problem for the largely female society. The planet's leader, Madame Rana, believes that the planet Saldak, their neighbouring planet, has discovered the cure and is willing to go to war for this cure. All the while, Syl makes another appearance and is trying to get the two planets to go to war so that he can profit off of it. Okay, now this is where it gets a bit complicated. All whilst this is happening, the Ice Warriors have been discovered on this planet underneath the ice caps. Whilst under the ice caps, they have planted nuclear explosives all around the planet, so that when it explodes, the planet's orbit will be changed and the weather will become more hospitable to the Ice Warriors. The interesting point about this is that they would have actually succeeded with their plan. The Doctor was too busy trying to get Rana to the other planet. The Ice Warriors actually activated these explosives, and when they get back, they see the devastation done to the planet. It is also revealed that Syl is the one who sold the Ice Warriors the explosives, but when the Ice Warriors tried to turn on Syl, he decides to join the Doctor and help them out. So they all decide to set off further explosives at a different point on the planet in order to fix the planet's orbit so that the conditions of the planet will go back to normal. The Ice Warriors, unfortunately, are caught in this new weather and die. Luckily, because of all of this, the virus has died out due to the change in the atmosphere happening more than once, and now males are allowed back on the planet, and they can repopulate. The Skelvakians offer to help repopulate the planet, so they end up becoming like a joint society, and Syl, as a great ending for his character, decides to stay because he sees business and profit in it. You got all that. That is probably the most complex story I've covered so far because there's so much going on in that. But it sounds like a really well-rounded and well-done story, especially if they were able to get a little bit of budget behind it, which again is very unlikely considering the era that it was proposed in. But I would have been very interested to see it personally. I didn't mention it earlier on, but this story would have been penned by Philip Martin and was unfortunately lost due to the cancellation of the show. But you can, of course, buy this as a Target novelisation, as well as a Big Finish adaptation. A link for both will be left in the description below. It should also be noted that Syl actually did end up getting used in this season, but he was used in a different capacity for the Trial of a Time Lord season, of course. Now, also part of the Trial of a Time Lord season was Robert Holmes' last hurrah as a Doctor Who writer. But it turns out, no matter what would have happened that year, he would have actually been penning a script. And the title was mad. Are you ready for it? Yellow Fever and How to Cure It. Commonly referred to as Yellow Fever, this story would have taken place in Singapore, of all places, and would have featured both the Master and the Rani, as well as the Autons. And the Brigadier on holiday. Do you see why this story sounds so interesting to me? This is mad. Now, unfortunately, not an awful lot is known about the specifics of the story because Holmes abandoned the script very shortly into it because as he only started writing a few weeks before BBC announced the cancellation of the series. So instead, after that, all his energy went to writing the first few episodes of Trial of a Time Lord. Simply for the idea alone of it being set where it was set and having what it did, this could have been one of the most unique looking episodes ever. And luckily we got some concept art out of this, which hopefully is playing on your screen right now. This one has the most intrigue, and for me that is why I am so fascinated by it. I don't know what it would have been like. I don't know if it would have even been feasible with the production budget, but they did around this time try to go to different places every once in a while. The previous season they'd been to Spain. A couple of seasons before that they went Lanzarote. of course, for Planet of Fire. And then a little before that, in 1979, they went to France. So it's not out of the realms of possibility that this could have been made, just not very likely. Now, the next story is interesting as it was written by another former script editor, Christopher H. Bidmead, and would have seen the return of the Tractators from Frontius. This story would have been called The Hallows of Time and would have dealt with a massive plot to create a new time machine with the Doctor's TARDIS. Starting off with the Doctor believing that he has lost some of his memories, to which the story takes place within that memory of the past 2 days. What the Doctor remembers is going to a small English village and meeting some of his old science friends, assumingly from the unit days. He meets up with his old friend Foxwell, who is no longer a scientist but has retired to become the Reverend of a church. They just happen to have arrived during a festival, where the Doctor meets Professor Stream as well, and things get weird from there. Whilst at this festival, the Doctor notices an artefact she later realises is a scale from a tractator. Professor Stream's assistant, which the Doctor calls Steel Specs, turns out to be the mastermind behind controlling a few people around the area, including their assistant Jane, who pilots a primitive time machine disguised as a car. It is revealed that Steel Specs, because he's not given a proper name, is planning to create a proper time machine and needs not only the Doctor's help, but the help of the Tractators, and is trying to manipulate everybody in order to get these parts that he needs. This causes the Doctor and the Great Tractator to team up in order to defeat Professor Stream and his group of brainwashed people. Over the course of this, it is revealed that Professor Stream never existed, and that his memories are all implants, and his credentials are all fakes. Now, that is never truly explained in this story, but it was going to be. Original drafts of the script had this character revealed to be the Master, but in subsequent drafts and versions, he was taken out. And of course, in the adaptation that I'm about to talk about, Big Finish, they had to get him out due to copyright reasons. Assumedly, the Master would have lost his TARDIS, and this would be his way of trying to get one back. Which, to be honest, sounds like a really interesting story. I'm sorry if that was a bit confusing. There was a lot to take in that story, and I tried to condense it as much as I could, because if you're going to buy this story, which I recommend, of course, I'll put the link in the description, I don't want to give everything away for you. But how do I think this story would have gone? I think it would have been a very Fifth Doctor-esque story. I think this would have fit better during Peter Davison's era completely. Just the setting and the monsters involved, it would have fit more in that era than in this era, really. Now, the last story is up for debate. There's a couple of ones that could have been the last story of the season, but first, I'll talk about two of them, and the first one was entitled Gallifrey, and was originally written by Eric Saywood, but then was taken over by Pip and Jane Baker, and then was abandoned. This story, although not much is known about it, would have dealt with the destruction of Gallifrey. That's right, they were going to plan to destroy Gallifrey all the way back in 1985. Now, how different would that make the show today? One can only assume that they changed the ideas what they did because they felt there was a bit more longevity in Gallifrey being there, and they were right because they got a great season out of it. The other story is a little more interesting, and again would have continued the idea of the Doctor and Perry needing a holiday. This story was written by Michael Callan and would have been the last script submitted before the cancellation happened in 1985. So the Doctor and Perry land on a desert planet, thinking it's a perfect place to have a little beach holiday. Unfortunately, they are trespassing on land and are captured by a human-like species called the Zeros. Unfortunately, on that planet, it is customary to execute trespassers, and the Doctor and Perry nearly get executed until the rebels of the planet convince the leaders that they're not with them. And from there, the Doctor decides that it's his mission to broker peace on the planet, and that is all we know about the story. I'll show you a quote on screen from the writer, but we still don't know an awful lot about this story, and it was never adapted by Big Finish, which is a bit sad. This one has very little about it, and even then it sounds interesting. I always like the idea of the Doctor coming between two races to broker peace. It's just an interesting concept. Nothing new, but it would have been nice. So overall, what do I think of these stories, and would they have been better than what we actually got? Overall, this series sounds wonderful. Everything that was pitched sounds at least good. Not everything was original per se, but everything was good and interesting, you know? And I especially would have liked to have seen what yellow fever was all about. Realistically, it's very hard to say if any stories would have been better than Trial of a Time Lord, as they are considered to be some of the better stories of the 80s. It is certainly interesting to hear these stories and what they could have been like. Right, that's where I'll leave it for today's video, but I hope you found all of that interesting and you've come away with something that you didn't know before. The next episode I'm going to do is about the 7th Doctor, which should be very interesting as we got a new script editor who had a very specific vision for Doctor Who's future. If you could, guys, please leave a like, please hit subscribe, and I will see you all very soon.